Welcome back, everyone. You know how this works. You give us the material and we dive deep, trying to pull out the most interesting and insightful stuff. Today, we're going to focus on Bruce's story and specifically episode 11, which is called Brief Moments of Comfort. It's a pretty powerful part of his journey. And to give us some context, we'll also be looking back at some of the themes that we've seen before, like in that developing theme guide, Three Times a Victim. It helps to see how everything connects, you know? If you're looking for even more detail, you can always check out the full episode takeaways. But for this deep dive, we really want to explore this specific chapter and see what kind of emotional impact it has, both for Bruce and for us as readers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, by this point in the material you provided, Bruce has already been through so much, right? The false accusation, the trials, being in jail. It's heavy stuff. And what we're going to be looking at today is how he tries to rebuild his life after all of that. You know, those first steps he takes, those little glimpses of peace he manages to find. It's all while still carrying the weight of what happened to him. So it's really about understanding how he navigates this aftermath, how he seeks out comfort and connection after being treated so unjustly.
Right. So let's start with his return to Wilmington. His money's running out, he's feeling lost, and he ends up taking a bus back. There's this part where he goes to Wrightsville Beach, and it actually brings him a sense of peace. It brings back memories of him and Lynn and this feeling of belonging. It really makes you think about how certain places can hold on to those happy memories, doesn't it? Almost like they have their own emotional echo.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because that kind of personal comfort he finds in these familiar places is immediately contrasted with the complexity of actually reconnecting with people from his past, like his reunions with Gene Jones and Thomas Childs, for example. They really show how tricky those interactions can be.
Yeah.
Jean, she's friendly, but her perspective of Bruce's relationship with Lynn is pretty limited. She remembers the fights, but not the deep love they shared. It makes you wonder how often we might only be seeing a fraction of someone else's story, you know?
It's true. It's like Jean's memory is kind of filtering things, preventing her from seeing the whole picture. And then there's Thomas, who's like a breath of fresh air for Bruce. Their connection is instant, it's warm, and you can really feel how much that means to him after years of feeling isolated. It's a good reminder of how crucial those strong friendships are, especially when you're going through tough times. It speaks volumes about that basic human need for connection.
For sure. And it's not just about reconnecting with old friends. There's this really interesting encounter with Bob at Measurement Inc. He's this seemingly ordinary guy, but he has some pretty unique spiritual beliefs. And what's fascinating is that even though his beliefs are a little out there, Bruce finds something soothing about him, just in the way he speaks, his soft voice. It's a small detail, but it really stands out. It makes you realize that comfort can come from the most unexpected places, sometimes even in the most unusual situations.
Totally. It's like sometimes it's not even about what people say, but just their presence, their demeanor, that can have an impact. And, looking at how Bruce navigates these old and new connections in Wilmington, it's not all smooth sailing. He runs into David Capps, who he's known for a while, but their interaction is pretty surface level, kind of distant. It highlights how not all relationships, even if they've existed for a long time, can really provide that deep emotional support. I guess it depends on the level of intimacy and trust.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And then there's Ryan, who June connects Bruce with. He ends up offering Bruce a place to stay whenever he's in town. And that seems like a pretty important development, right? It's like a sign of new support coming into his life, a small act of kindness that probably meant a lot to Bruce, especially when you think about how vulnerable he must have been feeling.
Absolutely. And in the midst of all this, he starts going to these poetry readings and meets Ana Ribeiro. They form this really positive connection, which is kind of ironic considering what he went through with someone else named Ana, right? But it shows a lot of resilience on his part. Like, he's not letting that past pain completely close him off from new relationships. It speaks to that human need for connection, for community.
It really does. And then there's this really poignant encounter with Lynn. They run into each other, but there's just silence between them. It's kind of heartbreaking when you think about the deep love they once shared. And you can see this internal struggle in Bruce. He wants to say something, to express his feelings, but he's paralyzed by fear of rejection. And it kind of echoes his silence in court, where he felt like he couldn't speak up for himself either. It makes you feel the weight of all those unspoken emotions and the damage that trauma can do to even the closest relationships.
It's a powerful parallel. Like, before, he might have felt comfortable expressing himself to Lynn, but now the trauma has created this barrier. But there's this detail in the text that's really interesting. It says that in that specific moment with Lynn, he wasn't feeling the shame of the false conviction. It suggests that being around her brought some relief, maybe replaced some of that past pain with Well, with just raw vulnerability and longing, it makes you think about how complex our emotions and memories can be.
It's like different people in different places trigger different emotions in us, right? And that brings us to this idea of Wilmington becoming a kind of sanctuary for Bruce. He talks about feeling this sense of peace and serenity there. Like it's a place where he doesn't have to worry about what people think about his past. He could even talk about it with Jean and Thomas without feeling embarrassed or ashamed. It's almost like the place itself offers a sense of emotional safety that he hasn't found anywhere else.
Yeah, it's like Wilmington represents acceptance for him, which is so different from the shame he felt in other places. The text actually uses the phrase sealed container to describe how the whole criminal matter seemed contained in that location. It's like the people there saw him differently, not just defined by what happened. It makes you think about how the environment you're in can really affect how you experience trauma.
It can either make it worse or help you heal, right? And if you look at the developing theme guide, it talks about how Bruce has been repeatedly failed by the systems that were supposed to protect him, the legal system, even his own family. And in that context, Wilmington becomes this unexpected source of protection, at least on an emotional and social level. It highlights how important it is to find safe spaces, both internally and in the outside world.
And then, sadly, there's the passing of Dusty, who hosted the poetry readings. She's described as this warm, motherly figure, and you can't help but think how much Bruce could have benefited from having someone like that in his corner during all of this. Her death really emphasizes his lack of support throughout his ordeal, and it probably makes that longing for the comfort he once had with Celta and Lynn even stronger.
Yeah, it's like he lost another potential source of comfort, another person who could have offered him that kind of nurturing and understanding that he needed. It really speaks to the idea of toxic shame and internalized unworthiness, which we see in the developing theme guide, and how those feelings can stem from not having that consistent support. It makes you realize how deep that need for genuine care and connection really is.
So Bruce decides to try rebuilding his life somewhere else, in Carborough, and it's a completely different experience. It's like the comfort he felt in Wilmington completely disappears, and he starts to feel like an outsider again, grappling with this feeling that he deserves to be excluded. It's sad to see how dramatically his experience changes depending on where he is. It shows just how much our environment can impact our sense of self and belonging.
And what's really striking is how the environment and the people around him start to influence how he sees himself. In Carborough, he's trying to build a normal life. He gets involved with the church, tries to connect with people, but he's constantly afraid that his past will come out and that people will judge him. And it's this fear that keeps him isolated. And that only perpetuates the cycle of trauma and makes it harder for him to move forward.
It's like that fear is holding him back from truly connecting with people. And then there's this whole thing with the background check at the church. Bruce wants to teach children, which is something that he seems genuinely passionate about, something that could give him a sense of purpose. But the church is being cautious, given their own history. And it's completely understandable from their perspective, but for Bruce, it's another rejection, another reminder that his past is still holding him back. You can't help but feel how unfair it is, like he's still being punished, even though he's innocent.
It really shows you how deep the systemic barriers go. Even when someone has been exonerated, like Bruce, they still face these obstacles. Even when they're actively trying to do good, to contribute to the community, the past just keeps haunting them. It makes you question how society treats those who have been through the justice system, especially when they were the ones who were wronged.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. And then there's that awful interaction at the poetry open mic. He shares a part of his story with someone he thought was becoming a friend, hoping for some understanding, some empathy, and instead the person just dismisses him, saying, "You can't expect people to take your word for it." It's like that one sentence just completely invalidates his experience and reinforces everything he's been fighting against. It makes you feel the rawness of that rejection, how painful it is to be so vulnerable and then have it thrown back in your face like that.
That moment really gets to the heart of Bruce's internal struggles. On the one hand, he's this kind, compassionate person who wants to help others. But that core identity is constantly being challenged by this false narrative that's been created about him. It's like his passion for social work, his natural affinity for children, all of these things that make him who he is are being threatened by what happened, and he's left with this feeling of lost potential, of not being able to be his true self because of this trauma. It's really sad.
Really sad. It's like his whole life has been turned upside down. And, it's significant that Bruce recognizes that he was already carrying a lot of pain even before the false accusation. The PTSD diagnosis really helps to understand how deep and complex his experience is. It's not just about the injustice itself, but also about past wounds that maybe got even worse because of what happened.
Absolutely. And it's really heartbreaking to see how much he tries to get his family to understand and support him, but they just don't. It seems like that lack of empathy from his own family has really affected his self-worth, adding to this belief that maybe he doesn't deserve love or compassion. It goes back to that theme of toxic shame and feeling unworthy, which seems to have roots even before the false accusation. It makes you realize how important family support is and how damaging it can be when it's absent.
It's like they're part of the system that failed him, too. But thankfully, the episode ends with this hint of a breaking point for Bruce, a suggestion that he's going to find a way to start loving and trusting himself. It gives you a sense of hope that even after everything he's been through, there's still a chance for him to heal and move forward.
And writing plays a big part in that. Both poetry and the book itself seem to be ways for him to process his anger and confront the people who hurt him, especially that puncture wounds collaboration. It's really interesting how he uses that vampire metaphor to represent the people who wronged him.
Yeah, that's a powerful metaphor. And it's revealing that he felt more comfortable expressing those darker emotions in Wilmington. Like the environment there allowed him to explore those feelings without fear of judgment. It really shows how important safe and supportive spaces are for healing from trauma.
It's the difference between feeling like you have to hide a part of yourself and feeling free to be your authentic self, even with the messy stuff.
So looking back at this deep dive into this particular chapter of Bruce's life, we see these little moments of comfort that he finds in familiar places, in certain connections. But it's all happening against this backdrop of ongoing struggles, both external and internal. It's a powerful story about resilience, about trying to find your footing after experiencing a huge injustice.
And I think the emotional core of this chapter is really about longing. Longing for belonging, for acceptance. And then, of course, there's the pain of rejection, the feeling of being alone. But there are also those small steps he takes towards healing, towards finding himself again. It's a complicated mix of emotions.
It really makes you think about how important it is to have those supportive people and spaces in your life, especially when you're dealing with difficult experiences. And it makes you wonder, what does it really mean to carry that unseen weight of trauma? How do you even begin to rebuild a sense of normalcy when you've been through something so traumatic? It forces you to reflect on the resilience it takes to keep searching for connection and comfort after being betrayed by the systems that should have protected you. It's a story that stays with you long after you finish reading it,